Hello, everybody. Do you ever feel like you're drowning in a sea of Instagram content? Are you wasting way too much time on creation and not enough time on growing your presence on Instagram? Well, do you wish there was an easy way to batch content without giving up hours of your day? Are you looking for a simple solution to consistently plan your Instagram posts and stories? Well, you have come to the right place. Welcome to the Marketing Unleashed show. I'm Jeff C., and you're not. And I'm joined here by two lovely ladies. Rebecca, why don't you introduce our guest today and tell us what's happening on the show?
Yeah, you bet. So I am joined, well, we're both joined here by Calla. Calla Hamlin is new to Tailwind. She is a marketing intern and is joining us to kick off a new feature we're going to do here on every single one of our live shows. And she's going to talk to us about all the new stuff going on in the world of social media, especially Instagram. As we know, there is so much news to keep up with, so many changes, so much happening. So Calla, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. I am so excited today because I have three very exciting news stories to share with you about the wonderful world of Instagram as we know it. And the first of these is that Instagram is now officially enabling advertisers to boost branded content partnerships as ads. So at this point, you might be wondering what that means for you. So before, you could actually partner with an influencer and only be able to reach that influencer's followers. But now you can create branded content together within your partnership, and you're going to be able to boost that as an advertisement. So you're going to extend your reach beyond just the influencer's followers and actually be able to measure that performance with analytics. And the good news here is that any content creator is able to produce that. So it's not just limited to someone with millions of followers. So the reason that Instagram is doing this is because they are trying to make influencer marketing more integrated and accountable. And don't worry, it is going to be transparent. So viewers are actually going to be able to see that it's a paid partnership ad and that it's being sponsored. This is going to be available to the main feed in the coming weeks and to stories in the coming months. So be sure to be on the lookout for that. And good news, Tailwind actually just put out a blog yesterday about creating an influencer marketing strategy. So if you are interested in learning more about that, be sure to check that out. The next story is that Instagram TV or Instagram television is now going to be able to support landscape or horizontal videos. And this is really exciting because before you were only able to post vertical videos. So the reason they're doing that is because after extensive feedback from both creators and viewers, they've decided that they want to focus more on the content rather than just the format. So this is really exciting because you're able to be more creative, especially if you have videos where you're trying to capture a lot of people, like maybe a dance recital or a sporting event. And they're expecting creativity and engagement to flourish in order to help y'all grow communities and build better businesses. And lastly, for my final story, I'm going to tell you that this one isn't officially launched. It's more of a rumor, but we're thinking that Instagram is working on the ability to share a direct link to your Instagram story. Now, this is really exciting, especially for you bloggers out there that may want to be able to reference a certain time. So maybe you have a blog post about family fun at the pool and you just were there last week. So you would be able to actually put a direct link that's unique to your story into your blog post, which would really just give your readers a better idea of what it is that you're talking about. So this is unclear about if this would only be for 24 hours only, but if we had to guess, we would assume that you would need to save that story as a highlight in order to access it later. So if this does happen, we're expecting more businesses to invest more time and energy into their stories. So be sure to hop on that trend before it really blows up. And that's all I have. It's exciting.
Wow. So there's always tons of news. I mean, I'm sure, this will be a recurring event because it seems like things change like every day on Instagram and all the news in the social networks. So thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah. Well, and not just change these little things that trickle out there that we think might be coming, which that's super exciting to think that we'd be able to share a direct link like that. So Calla, awesome job. Thank you.
Thanks, Calla. We'll see you next time. Bye. All right, Rebecca. So here, while we're getting ready for the next segment, I wanted to ask you, so What do you think about that news about being able to do landscape video on IGTV? Do you think that's going to matter, or do you think that's just them trying to, get a little more spotlight on IGTV?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things going on in there. I think, yes, people were asking for it and
Hmm.
they listened, which is excellent. Um, but yeah, it's no secret that IGTV hasn't had the adoption rate that they had hoped. So I think this definitely opens up the door to those that just weren't interested in having only one option. It'll be interesting to see if there is a wave of new people that make their way on over and start using it. And certainly we're going to see that in our feed. We'll be able to tell pretty quickly. I'd be
Right.
interested to hear too from our viewers, from our members, if that makes a big difference, to you as somebody that's spending time on Instagram. Have you embraced IGTV at this point? And if not, do you think you will because of this change? For those that, just really stick with kind of the tried and true format, I think there was a lot of pushback on it where they just weren't really interested in doing that type of
Hmm.
video. And wondering, oh, what the heck else do I do with this video when I'm done with it?
Right.
So maybe it'll open up creativity too in how you can repurpose, maybe repackage what else you can do with that content.
Very cool. Well, I also wanted to make sure before we bring on our next co-host that those of you who are joining us and may have not know what in the world Tailwind is, that if you go to bit.ly/marketing unleashed, we have a special offer just for you. So go ahead and go to that URL that you see on your screen there. It's bit.ly/marketing unleashed. And we'd love to see you over there. So let me bring on our next co-host really quick, Kristen. Kristen, love to see you here. So we're so glad to have you. Let me pull up your, wrong button. There we go. Got your name for everyone to know, everyone to see. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be here.
Awesome.
So I'll give a little context real quick, Jeff, if that's okay.
Sure,
So
go ahead.
Kristen is on the marketing team at Tailwind. She's a content marketer and she writes all kinds of amazing blog content that you can see on the Tailwind blog. And she has a very special focus right now on Instagram. And so we wanted to bring her in all of her awesome expertise to talk about our topic today, which I can't wait until we can talk a little bit more about all the big things, big juicy things that Kristen is working on for you as our viewers here today. But she's going to give us just a little peek into just how much she knows around the topic of Instagram. So thank you for taking some time out.
Absolutely. I'm so excited.
So I want to give a shout. I want to give So I want to get a shout out to some people who are in the audience watching us. We're having Facebook's having a little glitch with bringing on comments right now, but I want to give a shout out to Lee. Lee is here. She's very excited for our news section with Kala there. Alisa, of course, is in the audience, and Bethany Ann. Thank you guys so much for showing up and watching. We really appreciate you guys, and make sure you ask your questions. We'll try to bring them on if it comes back, but we'll try to answer your questions if you pop them in there right below the screen, and we'll get to them as we see them. Instagram, a lot of stuff going on. What is the first step that you would say that people really need to do when they're trying to create what we're calling an unstoppable Instagram content plan? Because you can't just throw up stuff and see what sticks. I mean, a lot of people do that, but they don't get very far. So what is the first step that you tell people when they're trying to come up with a content plan for Instagram?
Well, and you make such a great point because Instagram is just like anything else. It's like any of our other social channels. It's like our blog. It's like that video we're creating. We really need to think this portion of our Instagram plan through when it comes to the type of content we're going to share and the type of content that we're going to put out there and the type of content that our audience feels is most valuable. So the first thing you need to do to really make this process easy is to think about what your content categories are going to be. So, what kind of content could you talk about every single day? What kind of content is it just natural for you to chat about? Like if we were sitting here and I was your bestie and we were having a conversation, you would just be nonstop about. That's the kind of content that needs to align with your business, needs to roll up into all of your company goals that you're going to want to share over there on Instagram. And so when you think about your content categories, maybe you're a blogger, maybe you are creating video on a consistent basis. You've already got categories, is my guess, that you link to those topics you want to talk about all the time. And I'll give you kind of an example of how we break this down at Tailwind. So our content categories could be something like Instagram marketing tips or Instagram stories or Instagram case studies, those topics that we know are important to our audience that you've told us you want to learn more about. You want to better understand how you can use Instagram or Instagram marketing within your business. So think about what those topics are, A, that you could talk about all the time, and B, that directly align to your company, and then C, are incredibly invaluable to your audience that they're going to say, whoa, I got to have more of this. And Kristen, I know we talk a lot about categories and really figuring this out. And I know this can be a blocker for some people too, where you think about, wait a second, I have 20 different categories that I could talk about. Do you have any advice for that person that's trying to wrangle all of those different categories and ideas? How to keep it simple, how to whittle that down to those maybe top 5 categories?
Yeah, I think whittling it down to the top 5, especially if you have a large knowledge base to pull from and tons of different topics that you can talk about, it's really kind of aligning with, like you were saying, if you were sitting having a conversation with a friend, like what would you be able to tell them and educate them on that they would be able to walk away from that conversation knowing exactly how to do whatever you're talking about and do it with enthusiasm, or be soothed if they had a problem that they didn't know necessarily how to solve or how to do something, and that you could instruct them and they have confidence after that conversation. Those things that you can teach and empower people with knowledge, I think, are the strongest places to pull those content categories from. Those are the places that you'll get the most fulfillment, I think, teaching from, and that your readers will, or followers will, get the most fulfillment following you receiving that information from you.
And you said something really important in there, which is talk about what you're skilled or you're knowledgeable within. And I think too often we overthink Instagram and our Instagram content. And we think, I have to be somebody that I'm not necessarily that person in real life. And that could be a tricky place and also a very slippery slope where if you're not talking about what you know, you're not genuine about distilling that information. You talked about training or teaching. It's going to catch up with you pretty fast, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. I think authenticity is really important. I think some people sometimes get a sense from Instagram content, like you're saying, that they have to be someone that they're not, or they have to put on sort of a little bit of a facade or a very nicely packaged version of themselves that may not be the most authentic version of themselves. And I really think that place, that authenticity is what drives really good content over time on Instagram. So being true to yourself and your content, I think, is really key factor.
So here's a question for you. So I know a lot of people, like, they're like, I'm not a very good photographer, or, and a lot of times they'll go and kind of copy like somebody else's kind of style or Instagram aesthetic or something like that. So what do you tell people when they're trying to figure out, where to go on Instagram? Like, do I do I have to do all flat lays, or do I all have to do this? I mean, so how do you kind of direct people to find, I guess, their own style? What's the best place to start on that?
I think for me, for my recommendation, I think there is an importance in looking at different content and these people who inspire you, and seeing what they're doing, seeing what really resonates with you, and you think like, gosh, I really want to do that, or I think that my content or my style could be best conveyed in this way. And then figuring out how to put your own twist on it. It's definitely not looking at, you know, an influencer or someone that you blindly copy all of their style because it's working for them, because that kind of gets away from that authenticity. But you can definitely draw inspiration from those things that you can picture yourself doing and really working for what you're putting out there.
Yeah, great advice.
Yeah, well, and you think about that, it really goes back to some of the foundational pieces within business or marketing, which is modeling, you know, taking a look at what are people doing, what's working, and then figuring out how can I model that, but model it in a way that feels true to me, model it in a way that maybe eliminates some of that learning curve or trying to figure out exactly what type of content is resonating. So, for example, you can go out and look at, you know, 5 of your top competitors and get a feel for what's really working. So what type of images are working, or is it videos that they're responding more to? Or what do those captions look like? Are they long? Are they short form? What kind of words are they using? So you can learn these things, but then to your point, you really have to figure out then, how do I plug that into my own brand, my unique isms, you know, whatever it is. Like, Kristen, you're such a great example, Oklahoma girl that uses all those fantastic Oklahoma words and phrases. And I mean, it's just so spot on with your personality. So when I see you on Instagram or anywhere else and you're having a conversation, it's so easy for me to connect with you online, just like I do in the offline world. And that's what we should be pushing towards, right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. That's such a compliment.
Well, and I think so too, is that what you were saying about authenticity, I got it right. I can never say that word. And I think the trend is more and more people are tired of seeing, and especially on Instagram, the same old super polished and, you know, fake, if you will, view of other people's lifestyle. And I think that may be one of the reasons why Instagram stories is got so much popular so fast, because a lot of people are just showing behind the scenes. It was raw. It's just out what I was doing. And we see that as just going crazy. And even other networks are trying to jump on the bandwagon of the stories type format. So what are some ideas that you have for, you know, being, I guess, authentic on stories?
I think stories is an amazing platform to start from a place of authenticity, like you were kind of touching on with behind the scenes, kind of a backstage sneak peek of, you know, depending on what your content is, what your niche is, whether you're, you know, in retail or whether you're a blogger, it's kind of that little unfiltered look behind the polished product, or, right, you know, whatever winds up in your feed is, you know, that may be that end product that's a flat lay or, you know, some polished version of what you're conveying. But it's really nice, I think, for your followers to get to see it all come together behind the scenes and to really understand your process and a little bit more of who you are as a person. And so I think with stories, especially video, is an amazing way to connect with people, even hopping on for just a couple seconds to say, hey, or, you know, to have like, this is how my day is going. This is what I'm working on. This is what I'm inspired by today, I think is an amazing way to connect with people.
Great tips.
Well, and what I love about, all of those tips is they can really work for anybody, whether you're a blogger or e-commerce. We were chatting just before we hopped on. Um, Jeff got to hear all of our makeup talk, but
I have
Kristen
two
and
girls in
I,
my house, so it's easy. Yeah, used to it.
you're good with it, huh?
Yeah,
We were
that's fine.
talking how much we love Morphe and Jeffree Star and Jaclyn Hill cosmetics. And so it's fun to be able to see in just that industry what they're doing with stories. But when you expand upon that, we all have something we're creating, we're presenting, we're doing, whether it's your own story that you want people to connect with, or it's your product or your service. Maybe you're a business coach or a life coach, and you want people to really understand who you help, how you help, and what your exact solution is. Stories is so wonderful for that. And I think it is because it's very real and it's very raw. And it's not that polished, which Jeff, you were mentioning getting rid of the polish, and the Atlantic did a whole article around this, how we are making a huge push away from the staged feeling of Instagram, which I adore because I never much cared for it, kind of that magazine feel, where we have a whole generation of newer Instagrammers that are pushing back on that and saying, that's not who I am. That is not my real life. Why am I going to pretend to be one thing on Instagram, maybe another in stories, and then a completely different one over on YouTube? So I love that there's kind of a convergence of real life happening on Instagram right now. I hope we continue to see.
Right. So we've talked about this first, that was just the first point. So what's the second point on, getting, this great Instagram content out and actually planning? Because we're talking about having a plan, and, a lot of us don't like to have plans, or we put it off. But what's the second part you're talking about, how to, write? I mean, some of us don't like to write. Right here, not a big writer. But how do you go through and figure out what to put for the captions, and where do you put them, and how long, and all that stuff? So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're talking to two writers, so
right. It's just, come on,
we can help.
Do a video. Yeah. So how do you plan it out? Like we're doing this content plan, which is we're setting things out, we're laying it out, and so I'd be interested in both of you, because I know you both have good presence on Instagram. How far ahead do you plan? I mean, are you like going on like a weekly basis, a monthly basis? What is, when you feel like you're really, going on all cylinders, how far ahead are you going?
Well, and that's a great question, because we can talk about it both from a personal as well as a business side. For me, I'm really in the moment. I have to feel it with posts, with stories, with everything else. And it also centers around how much I travel. So I really have fun taking people along with me. And I know Kristen was just traveling as well, and you did a fantastic job with that. So I think she and I are probably very similar in our use on the personal side of being interactive, being in the now. So, not being afraid that, oh my gosh, this doesn't, it doesn't look as polished as it should, so
Right.
kind of having fun with those moments. But then you've also got to balance that with knowing where you're headed. So understanding you are in the moment, does that picture you're about to put up on Instagram actually mesh with your aesthetic, with what those categories are, what you're talking about? Does it make sense for your brand if you're a personal brand like myself? So you do have to be very aware of what those categories are, which is why we started there, because whether you're doing the in the now type of posting or you are planning ahead, it really does matter that you're talking about similar things over and over again and not getting way off the beaten path to where your followers are going, what the heck? What is she talking about? What is this? This is so random. But on the flip side of that, from a brand perspective, Kristen, you can talk a little bit about, we're actually jumping into our own personal challenge right now. And so she's going to be batching a lot of content.
Yes, yeah. So we're working on a new content plan that will kind of enable us to batch out content, like Rebecca was saying, plan it around 5 central themes or your content categories, sort of like we talked about before in step 1, and just using those different categories to hit a certain note. If you posted, say, 5 times in a week, because you're supposed to post once a day for maximum engagement, hitting one of those content categories or one of those markers every day using content that you've already created. And so doing that, or kind of having that framework, I feel like gives you room to wiggle around in a little bit if you're one of those spontaneous Instagram posters like Rebecca, but it also gives you a solid framework to keep you on track with conveying the most valuable content that you have and really upholding your brand on Instagram.
So,
yeah, well, and this kind of leads us into the second point you were talking about, Jeff, as we're planning this out and knowing our categories. Now, how do we actually think about writing those posts? And that can be that big roadblock for a lot of people is, oh man, okay, I can take a picture, but how do I think about taking those categories and putting them into a post that actually makes sense for my audience, makes sense for my business? And so what Kristen, again, to go back to what she's working on right now, is how to create a framework where it is very simple. So you could take one of those content categories. So I'll use Instagram marketing as an example. And then you could do a little bit of research. You could do some very basic research of what has been talked about around that category already that would be interesting to your audience. So go out to Google search. That's one of my favorite places to start, and type in, Instagram marketing or Instagram marketing tips or Instagram marketing ideas, just any of those prompts that Google then is going to give you some ideas as to what's already been written around that. You're going to be able to see, is your competition showing up on page 1, position 1, or just anywhere there on that first page. And now start to click through and get some ideas as to what are those topics other people are talking about. And then you could hop over to Instagram and look at those same competitors and see what kind of interaction around those topics are they getting. And then back to what I had touched on, are they writing long form or short form? Are they using a whole lot of emojis? Are they using line breaks? How are they formatting that caption? So there's 2 pieces within this second piece, which is really starting to write and flesh out those topics, and then also understanding how are you going to translate that over to the Instagram platform in a way that caption captivates and really captures the attention of your audience.
So research is key, which a lot of us don't want to do. We just want to post pretty pictures. And so I thought that your Google...
Which is fine if you don't have a brand or a business behind it that you're really wanting it to drive real results off of Instagram. Yeah. Then hey, have at it. Post all the pretty pictures you want.
Right. So I thought it was really interesting with how you could use the Google Suggest tool, like you mentioned, in those categories and start. And Kristen mentioned earlier, batching things out. So you could go and do one of those content categories and do some research and do the hashtags and everything. And so you're not overwhelmed. And then you could, take a break and then do the next one. So you're not all trying to chunk it all out at once, but you can kind of break it down into those little categories and come up with some content. At least that's what I found when I'm working for clients, It's easier to do it in like, okay, I'm going to just, if I'm like mentioned before, we're going to do an Instagram marketing tips for Tailwind. I'm going to do all those in one sitting and try to get as many as far as I can. And then I'll come back and maybe do, okay, here's the content I'm going to do for the Instagram stories. How does that tie in? And not try to, because it's easy to go into what I call vapor lock, where you're just like, oh, I've got so much to do. I don't know what to do. Where do I start?
Right.
And so starting with one kind of content category and moving forward, I think, at least for me, that's what works.
Oh, I totally agree. And it can be as simple as, so Kristen talked about those 5 content categories and aligning one of those to every day of the business week is what we're thinking. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And you could get yourself ahead one day. That's
Right.
all it takes to be consistent on Instagram. So I'm going to plan today for my Monday piece of content, and I'm going to pull one of those categories, and then I'm going to do a little bit of research on Google. I'm going to use that Google Suggest like you talked about. I'm going to find a topic, and then I'm just going to sit down. And I would give yourself a timer.
Right.
I would just say 15 minutes and write out that first caption that's going to go with that first content category in that topic, and then get that scheduled out so you're all ready to go on Monday at your best time. Hint, hint, you can do that right within Tailwind.
Right.
And go from there. It is crazy how much momentum you can get out of just one 15-minute process every single day that kicks you forward one more day, one more day, one more day. And that writing starts to become so much easier too.
Right. One of the things I do, and I'll use Tailwind and one of my clients for example. So like what you're saying, one day or one section of time, I'll post all the images of the product. So I'll put those all in my draft in Tailwind so I can see them all laid out. Then I'll come back later and write all the descriptions and do all that and have the descriptions done. And then I come back and then I'll do the hashtag, use the hashtag tool and go into each of those posts that are still in drafts on Tailwind and get all the hashtags optimized. And then I will add them to my schedule. And what I'll do then is, since I can open up and see the grid view, a kind of a preview inside of Tailwind, what's going to look like during the week, is I'll make sure that I don't have too many, like if I'm pinning chocolates or whatever, I won't have too many chocolates stacked together that looks like just one big blob of brown, on my Instagram feed. You want to break it, so I'll use that preview tool to break it up to make I'm not going into like, I'm not really super like, oh my gosh, I've got to go back and forth. I'm just making sure it doesn't have one blob of color, or it's going to have a good contrast between the two. Like if I have one client where we do a lot of cocktail recipes, so I try to vary the cocktail recipe, the shots of the different colors of the different cocktails and their other products they have. So I find that's really handy in Tailwind, but I do it in those sections. I do, the images, then I do the descriptions, then I do the hashtags. Is that what you how do you work, Kristen? I'd love to know your process in laying all that out.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the really nice thing about creating a content plan like this, where it's you have your categories, one on each day, is that you have a lot of flexibility in how you decide to do that. So you're saying that you break it up into different sections, you do your hashtag research, you upload your image, you do this and that. For me, I like to move at least a week out. So I like to get my 5 out at once. I tend to like to vary things a little bit. So I don't like to stay in one content category and schedule out that way. I like to move through the week and say, okay, I have my Monday, my Tuesday, my Wednesday, et cetera, and make sure everything's done that way so that I give myself at least 3 to 5 days out whenever I schedule. So then I feel like I have some wiggle room if I need to make any changes, or, if I decide like this spontaneous thing that I'm doing, I think would really belong on stories or on my feed, I have room to put that in without disrupting any major workflows. So I tend to work through the week and just say, okay, I've got I've got my 5 days done. I've got my hashtag research done, my images uploaded, my captions written out. I tend to like long form captions. I think it's pretty proven that on Instagram, you know, there's a lot of engagement with the longer form captions. And so you can really get your point across, make an emotional connection with your audience, and then include a call to action depending on what your content is. And so I just tend to write those all out for the week and then get ready for the next week.
Well, and the cool thing about Tailwind Scheduler is that, like, I was traveling in Florida for the past, 5 days, and I could actually work ahead using the stuff that both of you guys mentioned and not have to worry about it. I would know that it was, I can work ahead. And so, like, you want to do 5 days, but if you have to, you could go like more than that if you want to sit down and do it. So that's what's so awesome about having a scheduler, which takes a little bit of like oh crap, I've got to post today, I forgot, that kind of thing. And I remember back in the day when we got those notifications and then we had to post. And so that we thought that was cool, but now we don't even have to worry about that. So very cool stuff.
It is. It's wonderful.
All right, so let's go to the next step. This is my favorite part, probably, is creating your visual assets. So what are the steps involved in doing that, Kristen?
So whenever you decide on your visual style, I think there are a few different components that go into that. I think choosing a color or a color palette or different tones that you want to use in your feed. For example, Tailwind, we have a rainbow feed, so we cycle through different colors, and you'll notice as you scroll through, you go through different shades, and so that's an example of what we do for our color style. There are tons of different options out there, and so with color and color palettes, if someone's maybe not as familiar with that, personally, my favorite way to find colors that might work with your brand or your style is I constantly haunt the Pantone color website.
Yes.
And so
it's a good one to haunt.
Yeah, and so they do like trend forecast reports. So there are ready-made color palettes available, but if you have one color that you're like, this is the color of my brand, or like this is what I want my feed to look like, bright pastels or things like that, you can really kind of customize your color palettes there. Or you can search for color palettes on Pinterest.
Yes.
Yes, that's a great place too. Well, and there's a couple other coolers that is a tool that it will allow you to kind of pick your favorite color, and then it'll give you ideas of those perfect colors to pair with that. Adobe has their own as well. So there's tons of different ways that if you don't feel color inclined to be able to figure that out, that you can really start to nail it down. And Pinterest is such a great resource where you can see what those color palettes are of people that you're most attracted to, that you really love as you're scrolling through your feed. And so it's just figuring out too, if you've got that brand color, how do you weave that into everything that you're doing as well? So for us, for example, right here with this live, you can see our Tailwind blue, and we take that over to Instagram with, say, our logo or our bug. So there's a lot of different ways that you can create that consistency with your brand. And Kristen, you raised so many points. Just thinking about what feels authentic, what feels natural. I think this all goes back to that of what kind of pictures too are you going to be sharing? So you're going to be out in nature a lot. Are you going to be indoors mainly? Are you going to be in front of a white screen or a green screen? So depending on your business and your industry, you got to think about that too. And what's going to feel most consistent with what you're doing. But lots of cool ways that we can figure these things out without having to know anything about design.
Absolutely.
So what would yeah, go ahead and tell us the next step, because there's some I can read ahead. So I'm looking at some of the great points that you made that I want to make sure we cover and have enough time to, because A lot of this stuff I think gets lost, and you broke it down, I think in a clear way, because we see some of our favorite Instagrammers out there and what they're doing, and to be honest, they have a process, and they're walking through the steps. They're not just throwing it up there. So go ahead and tell us the next one that you want to point out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So after colors, I think fonts is something that often gets overlooked. And font can really convey a lot of things to your followers, or just looking at an image. The use of fonts really conveys a lot about your brand, and sometimes that's overlooked, or people maybe don't pay as much attention to that. But your font is definitely tied to your style choice of whatever content that you're producing. And so if someone maybe isn't as familiar with font choices or pairings or things like that, there are a ton of great resources even on Pinterest, but online. And I always get emails from Creative Market, and so there are tons of like hand-drawn fonts, different ones that I'm just a junkie for it. I love seeing all of those, and so I use that as a resource if I'm looking at new fonts and font pairings, or I also go to, I think it's called Font Squirrel, but they have a lot of different options, and you can try them out and pair them. And then, just kind of keeping some basics in mind as far as pairings. Like, you don't want, two hand-drawn fonts together. It'll look really busy and complicated really fast. So usually you try to, balance that out a little bit with your font choices, but that can have a huge impact on your Instagram strategy as well.
So I want to ask you about, and I get on kind of a soapbox when it comes to some of these hand-drawn fonts, which I think are great, but I always tell people, remember, it's going to be on a mobile device. I mean, this goes for Pinterest and Instagram, and there's kind of, there was, and it still is, this like thing where it's like super, hand-drawn, and you can't read a word they're saying. I'm sorry. You can't, it's too, it looks like my handwriting, which you don't want to emulate at all, because it's horrible and you'd never be able to read it. So I don't mind the hand-drawn fonts as long as you can read what they're saying. And I think your point about, and I've also seen some people who try to use too many different kinds at once, and it looks like some schizophrenic signed something on your phone screen. So you want to I think, be really careful with those and look, I mean, because a lot of people will design them on their big monitor and say, oh, there's my Instagram image, and then they put it on there and you just can't read it. So I'm sorry, I had to push back a little bit on that, because I just sometimes
it's a great point. I use the highly technical squinty eye test. So I squint my eyes, and what's the first thing I see? If I cannot see and read that text, you've got the wrong font. So you can do the same exact thing. It's just, you want it to pop. You want people to be able to immediately know what you're trying to convey, what you're trying to get across. And we're on mobile. We're accessing Instagram on mobile. So it makes it even more difficult, because maybe we're on the subway, we're walking, wherever we might be, we might not have 100% attention on that graphic, and you just want to make it, just super recognizable.
Definitely. I think my rule of thumb when using like script fonts or hand-drawn fonts is that it probably shouldn't be an entire header or an entire sentence, but rather a focused word to catch attention.
Oh, that's a good
point. And then the rest of the text that you use, and whatever your graphic is, or your story, or whatever the design is, it should be a clean, easy to read font. I think hand-drawn fonts and scripts are a great way to catch attention, but they're harder to read the longer the sentence is.
Right. Good point. All right, so story. What makes a good story, and how do you kind of use that in your content planning?
Yeah, so I think telling stories, I think this ties back to the overall theme of authenticity that we were talking about before. adding a personal element or a brand element that's your story and that you're telling a story in your content is going to make it more relatable to an audience. And so I don't think creators should ever be afraid to put too much of a personal touch into their work, or it feels too clean and a little reserved. And so finding out or really developing what your story is, whether it's a personal brand or a professional brand, I think is really important addition to your content to make it authentic and to really make that connection with your followers.
All right, so I want to say so. Okay, a lot of people say, okay, Kristen, I've heard it to tell you my story on Instagram. Use my photos to tell a story. What does that mean? I mean, is it going to be a comic strip like with 8 panels that you go through? I mean, when you say tell a story, what does that mean? Because I think a lot of people hear that, and I know you have an answer to this. So I would love to know what both you and Rebecca think about when you say tell a story. How do you do that with one image? I mean, what's the best way?
I think on Instagram, first off, you don't just have one image, you have your entire caption too. So
there you go.
So I think your Instagram image that you choose should be an attention grabber. It should obviously relate to the story that you're trying to tell, but then you have that entire caption to really weave that story. You also have emojis to add visual elements. And so you really have an opportunity to tell a story that you're not just putting weight on one image to say like, we're not making a comic strip in our feed.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
You have space to tell that.
Right. So Rebecca, what about you? I've been watching Rebecca for years. I saw her over on Pinterest, and she was, a great storyteller with one image over there. And it's the same thing with her Instagram feed now. So how do you go about when you're setting up your shot or your image and the whole thing about Instagram? How do you kind of keep that story in your mind as you put together a post on the feed on Instagram?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it comes from the intent around that particular piece of content, and that could be two-sided. What is the intent of my audience? So when they're clicking through and they're looking at my feed and they're reading that particular post, what do they want to learn? What do they want to get out of it? What do they want to take away? And then for me, it's what do I want to impart? What part of me, my story, can help them learn or grow or bypass something super brutal or painful that I felt I had to learn the hard way. So it's just thinking about it in those terms of, what do I know? What have I done? What have I gone through within my life, my business? That would be immensely helpful to my audience as they're on a very similar journey. And I think so often we discount our own story. We think, that happened 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Nobody's going to care about it. But yes, they will absolutely love to hear how you struggled through, what you did to figure it out, how you overcame, or, where you are on the other side of that. And also those things that you're still struggling with. I find that those questions I ask where I'm like, man, I am knee deep in this particular problem. Help me pull myself out. How do you get through, those days or those situations? So it's really involving your audience too. So getting them into the narrative, making sure that it's not a one-sided story where I'm just talking at you, but I'm pulling you in. So thinking about what can I share, but also how can I involve you in that conversation as well. And then always doing that gut check of, is this telling my truth? Is this really sharing something that's not only been very, a big deal within my world, within my own business, but it's going to have a big impact on my audience as well. So I think that gut check is important too, that we're not just saying, ooh, I want to tell a whole lot of things about how this is real in my business, but does it really actually make an impact on your audience?
That's a great point. Great point. So we're talking about creating your visual assets. So we've talked about, design with the audience in mind, that we got to choose our visual style, and it really matters with the color, the fonts, the voice you're using, what's the story, how that ties all in. So all that stuff together is kind of what, keeping it all harmonious. And how do you keep it from fighting against each other? I mean, those are a lot of different things that we've talked about: the font, the captions, the story. How do you get those all to blend together, Kristen? Is it take practice, or are there some things that you keep in the back of your mind as you're kind of putting all that stuff together at once?
It does take a little bit of practice, but I think whenever you really iron out the elements that to your brand that are like the fonts that you use and the colors, which probably won't change too much over time, you can start to kind of make a template or a general idea of what your posts are going to look like. And whenever you iron out your voice that you're telling these stories in, then usually there won't be too much of a battle, and you'll get more comfortable in conveying your content and your messages with that voice in your brand voice until it becomes, really natural for you. And I think another element of that too is kind of going back to what you were talking about with the 9-grid scheduler, and like making sure there wasn't a giant blob of brown in the feed. So that there's also something to be said for using a few different perspectives of photos and things so that it's not all uniform, and that you can test out to see what everything looks like as a picture. And this, sometimes people feel like maybe this might be a little too polished or getting away from that authenticity of the planning, but you can really see what everything looks like together to make sure that you weed out any of those posts or those elements, or that entire look, anything that's fighting against each other or pulling attention away from the message that you're trying to convey. And you can kind of reorganize a little bit to keep it as harmonious as possible.
Awesome. So step 4, because we're not making this Instagram feed just for giggles, right? We're trying to drive some traffic, or we're trying to get people to buy stuff. So include a powerful call to action. So what, for those, let's say there's people who here don't know what a call to action is. So why don't you really quick tell us what a call to action means, and how do you make a powerful one?
Well, your call to action is basically that next step. So what you're asking people to do once they've read through. So what is it that you want them to do? Is it that you want them to click through and read your blog post, or go see your latest lipstick? Whatever the case might be. I know we're stuck on makeup today, but
come on.
Well, and we're even talking about Pinterest, and now I just want to go pin all the pretty things.
I know, that's right. I just went to pin food stuff.
Okay, I'm totally down with that. And you talked about drinks. I have a whole board that is delicious drink. So,
Right, there you go.
There are those important things. You're going to spend a little bit of time on the three of us and either our Pinterest or Instagram and pretty quickly figure out what's important.
Exactly,
Food,
exactly.
drinks. But yeah, your call to action. There you go. That call to action is that next step. So always thinking ahead, one step ahead, and what is it you want your audience to do? Because you never want to leave that to chance. You never want your audience to try to figure out what they have to do. We know a confused mind will never take that next step. They'll never click. They'll never buy because there's too much coming at them. They have to make too many decisions. So you'd want to make it as simple as possible. One clear call to action within your Instagram post. So you don't want to go out there, give them 3 different things that they have to do. You want one very clear, thought out call to action. So what best aligns, what's most relevant to that particular Instagram post, and what's going to have the biggest impact. So is there a brand new blog post that coincides that you want them to go out to? Is there a brand new video you just put up on YouTube and you want them to go check that out? So thinking through, and that's really where that strategy that Kristen was talking about comes in, thinking through what are those 5 5 days worth of content? What is that call to action that's going to go with every single one of those? Because otherwise you are doing what Jeff talked about at the beginning, which is you might be posting and you're posting a lot of pretty things, but you're not actually asking people to take any action whatsoever.
Cool. So Kristen, why don't you run down some of the like the great calls to action that you can think of, some examples of like ones that you have seen that have worked for people in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there are a few different styles of calls to action that work. One of them is creating a sense of urgency, or that you're going to miss out unless you take advantage of whatever, or you do this next step, or you click this button. Unless you follow through with this call to action, you're going to miss out. That could look like you have maybe 5 days left for a promotion, or there's a limited supply of something, or a site or a course or some kind of sign up will be closing soon while supplies last, that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Creating a sense of urgency in your audience that they have a limited amount of time to take advantage of something and they don't want to miss out. That would be a great example of one. I think next would probably be exclusivity. So that they have to request an invitation, or it's members only, or it's some kind of thing you have to work for to be part of an inner circle, or feel like you're in an exclusive group, or a tier of people have taken advantage of, a course or some kind of resource of yours. I think persuasion, for example, using power words like, guarantee and results, or free is a great driver.
Yeah, right. Buy one, get one free. Yeah. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And just kind of using those buzzwords to create that idea that this is something that I want. I think those are great examples of calls to action that you can use in your caption that are clear cut. And I think a lot of people sometimes shy away from using a call to action in their caption or in their material because they're afraid of sounding too salesy. But the way that I always put it is that people, when they like your product, your service, or whatever it is that you're offering, they want to clearly be told what to do next to take advantage of it. So it's less of like a salesy inclusion and more of a guidepost, like here's where you need to go next. Here's the next step that you need to take.
That's great. Those are great things. I always talk about, and I've mentioned them here before on the show, but we have a local place that sells snow cones named Shivers. They sell it out of an Airstream trailer. It's really cool. They have this big setup. And one of the things they do is at the end of the day, they're always sold out. And they have the last person holding the last snow cone. And it's usually a little kid right by their sign that's a chalk, kind of a chalk sign that says sold out. And they take a picture and they post it on Instagram every time that happens. And I thought that's a genius call to action. It's using what you were talking about before is, a sense of urgency. If you don't get it, you better get there early tomorrow and get it. It's exclusive, but it's also very, very creative. And it's got the picture of somebody's kid on it. That's going to be shared everywhere. And so I just think it's a genius one. So if you can think of a creative call to action like that, I think that is, and kind of funny, kind of humorous. I just see those working so well. And on Instagram, it goes miles for this company. So very cool. So lastly, because we're kind of wrapping stuff up, the last step is to plan and schedule your Instagram posts and stories. And I think we have a tool that does that. I'm pretty sure.
Maybe
we have something that might work. Yes. So kind of because it's so awesome and we all love it. We were all fans before we were, we did stuff for Tailwind, but kind of break down some of the things, why this is such a cool tool and why it works so well for Instagram and planning your content, which we've been talking about this entire show.
Well, and I think we've mentioned quite a few of the benefits where it does. Scheduling out your content in advance frees you up from that stress of wondering what the heck you're going to post today or what kind of content or those topics we talked about. So it gives you that freedom to breathe and to also be creative. I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed out, when I'm like, I have got to post something, posting, that's the last time I'm going to be, or the least amount of time I'm going to be creative within that space. So it frees you up to really think about what's going to make the biggest impact for your audience. What kind of content do you want to schedule? And then getting that all into a system where you don't even have to think about it. So you can batch all of this. Kristen was talking about that earlier, where you could, if you wanted to, batch out a week or 2 weeks, where you're taking or creating all of your images. You can upload those in bulk up to your Tailwind account. And then you can get all of your captions in there. You can use our saved lists, which is one of my favorite features, where you can have all of your hashtags in saved lists. And I categorize those kind of based off of keywords. So what are your topics? And get your 30, hashtags within that. So as you upload those images, you drop your caption right in there. You can click on your hashtag list to drop those in. And now we have hashtag in first comment. So you can click a button and just automatically move those hashtags out of your caption and down into your first comment without you having to lift a finger, with no notifications. We talked about those earlier. This is all auto posting, and it's auto posting based off of your best times to post. So you go in and we tell you, here are the best times. First of all, you tell Tailwind exactly how many times you want to post, and say a day or a week. And then we tell you, okay, here's your best times to post: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So you don't even have to think about that. You don't have to go out and do any research whatsoever. So as you just drop those into your queue, boom, they move right into your next best time to post. But with our 9 grid, you can drag and drop. You can move those around. So back to Jeff's lovely example of chocolate. And
we can say poo. It's poo. It looks like a poo post. That's what we're going to say. It's a poo post.
What comes to my mind. Yeah.
That's right. We were all
exactly.
thinking it.
Yeah. So you can move those around so you don't have poop on your Instagram, because goodness knows who wants that.
Right. We went there.
I feel like this is going to be a clip coming of just Rebecca on loop.
That's right.
Yeah. Poop emoji.
So,
poop.
But I want to say that best time to post, because that does make a difference to the Instagram algorithm. And so it's really cool, because I have multiple clients, and it goes and sees what it works for you based on the geniuses over on Tailwind Engineering, and it's different for each of my clients. So it's not just they're going to just go every half hour or it actually looks at what's working for your feed, for that specific feed, and gives you the best time to post, which is very, very cool, and very, very handy, because it does make a difference, especially if you're just posting once a day.
Absolutely. Well, and that's the important part to understand too, is that, it's very specific, very unique to you, not just what times have worked well based on your content, but when is your audience online?
Right.
When are they showing up? Because that's such an important factor, to your point about the algorithm, is as soon as you post, you need people to see that within the feed. You need people to be interacting, to engage with your content. And when you're consistent, you are training. You're training your audience to know that you're going to show up, that you are committed to being a part of just that whole Instagram culture and their Instagram life. So there's so many benefits to automation. What you're not automating at any point is your interaction. So you're commenting, you're getting back into the conversation. What you are doing is for yourself up from those things that we don't necessarily need to worry about or have to think about.
Right. And with that is the 5 ways to help you create an unstoppable Instagram content plan. Thanks so much for you guys for watching. We want to make sure that if you haven't gone there yet, go to bit.ly/marketing-unleashed. That's bit.ly/marketing-unleashed. Thanks so much for everybody watching us today. Ladies, thank you so much for being here and dropping all your value and wisdom bombs on us. That was I'm gonna have to go back. I can't take notes while I'm pushing all these buttons, but I will go back and watch it again. So thanks everybody for watching. We will see you next time. Yes.
Jeff, we have
What?
one more thing. One
Oh,
more thing.
one more
Remember
thing.
one big thing.
What's
Yes.
that? Go ahead.
We have a huge announcement
Oh,
coming
that's
on Monday. Yes. So be on the lookout, whether you're over on Instagram, over here, Facebook, or look in your inbox. We've got something special for you, just like this link here.
That's right.
It's very exciting, very exclusive, and you are not going to want to miss it.
Do we know what time it's dropping on Monday? Is it in the...
It will be in the morning. I don't have an exact time,
Okay.
mainly because we're all in different time zones, so I'd probably screw it up anyway.
That's right. So stay tuned. Watch Tailwind on all of the socials, and yeah, it's pretty exciting. We're excited for this. So we will see you in the feed on Monday. So with that, we'll see you next time. Thanks, ladies. Bye now.
Bye-bye. All right. Take care.